The name Bloober Team is something of a hot topic at the time of writing. For those of you living under a rock, or perhaps watching this years or even decades in the future, this is because they're the studio working on the remake of Silent Hill 2. And a lot of people aren't really sure if they're qualified to do this. Silent Hill 2 is a game that people, including a past version of myself, regrettably, are usually very protective of. It belongs to that wonderful era of games from the early 2000s that I just love to gush about, and its open-ended story of trauma and depression led a lot of people to mapping themselves to one degree or another onto one character or another, and this makes people a little sensitive about it. I'm optimistic in that the standard for these kinds of remakes has been very high of late. So if Bloober knocked this one out of the park, then I have a new, awesome way to experience a game I enjoy, and if it sucks, I still have the original. And Konami might finally let this series that they've been slowly murdering for an incredibly long time actually die. Who am I kidding? I'm sure they'll find more pointless rubbish to slap Pyramid Head's face onto. So Silent Hill is something of a darling for a lot of people, and Bloober really doesn't have a good track record with sensitive topics such as mental health and trauma. Their previous contribution to the world of horror games was The Medium, a game with an interesting dual reality split screen mechanic that was actually very well received by critics and players alike, but has come under some heavy fire because of the above clumsiness with some very delicate issues. There are also some issues about how Bloober do horror, something I personally think should be handled in a subtle way that may not leave you with your heart racing at the time, but will absolutely have you second guessing yourself at the door to your room when you have to get up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. That's not the only way it can work, of course, but that's the kind that resonates the loudest with me. I didn't pick up Observer specifically to see if this developer was good enough to handle Silent Hill 2 though. I was just on the lookout for more cyberpunk and anything a little weird in the Steam sales, and I can say 100% that I got that. This question, however, was somewhere in the back of my mind while I was playing this, my first actual Bloober Team game. Are these the right people for the job? So when the dust had settled and the credits had rolled, I felt like I'd had a pretty good time overall. I'd been taken on an interesting and unique take on dystopian cyberpunk, got to explore a creepy liminal environment, and had been able to absorb the story of the world and its characters just by walking around. There were almost no inelegant exposition dumps or moments that made me yawn, and I have to admit the whole thing was quite the rabbit hole to have both fallen down and crawled out of. There is, however, one big problem. Something that is going to affect my, and I suspect your desire to replay this once it's all done and finished. So expect this review to be quite a bit more negative in the gameplay department than most of my others. But before we get there, why don't we talk about all the good stuff that you can get out of this? This is Observer System Redux. Observer begins with narration from our protagonist Daniel Lazarski, as he lays down an overview of the world as it is in 2084. It seems that while human augmentation began changing the way we interface with technology and everything about our lives, it left us vulnerable to a new pandemic called the nanophage. The outbreak killed thousands, and the elevated tension from it kickstarted World War III. It would seem that Deus Ex isn't the only science fiction game that can predict the future with Simpsons levels of accuracy.
As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. How bad is it, Secretary Van Houten?
We're broke.
In the aftermath of this devastation and the poverty that ensued, a corporate power named Chiron seized control of Poland and consolidated their power into the Fifth Polish Republic. But this world, as we will discover, has a lot in common with an Orwellian dystopia, with resources stretched thin, thousands if not millions dead, and the threat of the nanophage still beating at their door. The people were more than happy to trade away their personal freedoms for the illusion of safety, a chance to fill their hungry bellies, and to go back to some semblance of normality, where they can feel cared for by greater powers. Meanwhile, Chiron exploits the working class to reap the harvest of unimaginable wealth, transforming them into a Shinra or Arasaka-style megacorp that sits atop its pile of hoarded treasure like some great bloated dragon in a fantasy story, and removes any threat to its power with the most brutal of efficiency. People are kept afraid with controlled media and docile with electronic entertainments and digital distractions. There's no need to worry about the big problems or imagine you could have more when you've got, this game. I mean, it's pretty good, I guess. Everything they don't like, right down to the books they allow people to read, is policed with the utmost severity, and make no mistake, there is nowhere you can hide your secrets, especially not when Lazarski here can just jack into your brain and steal the thoughts right out of there. So this is a pretty good hook. This kind of dystopian fiction usually casts anarchists and rebels as their protagonists. These are the underdogs fighting to undermine and overthrow a dictatorial corporate power that drains people of their lives and spits out the husks. You could call these people cybernetic revolutionaries, or maybe techno-anarchists, or cyberpunks? But here, we are the law. Regardless of Daniel's motivation for entering into law enforcement, or the personal morals he holds to, he's part of the force that maintains the status quo and keeps the oppressive regime in power. This is a pretty cool subversion of the standard cyberpunk plot. With the intro over, we seemingly wake up in the driver's seat of a police car as though we were trying to escape the world, and have been rudely awoken by a call from dispatch. This opening conversation gives us a hint at our old disgruntled detective's personality, but also clues us into one of the few game mechanics that we'll have to keep an eye on. That is, taking a hit of synchrosine every now and then, to stop our body from trying to disconnect itself from the fairly hefty looking augmentation we've got running through it. Most people will recognize the voice of the legendary Rutger Hauer here. The game actually opens with a message saying that it is in his memory. I'm not going to try and eulogize or talk about his career here, but like most people, I know this guy as Roy Batty from the adaptation of Blade Runner and his most iconic monologue.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
This moment is actually called back to in the game too. At the time of recording for this game, Hauer was getting on in his years, and his character is also somewhat jaded and exhausted from life, as we'll see later. I will say that this isn't the most emotional or memorable performance I've ever seen given to a game character, but it does make sense with the setting and the story that we're in. This conversation is brought to something of an abrupt end when a fairly chunky looking laptop decides to unfold itself before us and take control of all communications.
Careful what you say. This is a monitored channel.
It doesn't take long for Lazarski to recognize the voice of his estranged son Adam, and when he senses trouble in the air, he's quick to leap into action to his defense. Tracing the call, he speeds on over to a very rundown looking apartment building and stomps through the front door to find out what the hell is going on. The building receptionist doesn't seem entirely coherent, and his augmentation is both ancient and far from subtle. This feels more like something that has been done to him versus something he chose for himself. There is a lot to take in on our first walk through this place, mainly because of this Matrix-esque augmented reality overlay that's been thrown up all around us. I'm not sure if this is something specifically tied to Lazarski's particular hardware, or if maybe it's just some way to hide how broken and dirty this place is to everyone who lives here. Kinda like how everyone in the Syndicate universe walks around in a digital paradise, so they don't have to face the much uglier truth that exists beyond it. I actually really like this first moment when we step outside into the storm and see all these different advertisements filling the night sky. It gives me real Blade Runner and Altered Carbon vibes. Man, I wish we could get some more of this. Even so, after a few minutes of walking through this, I found myself hoping that I wouldn't have to put up with all this noise cluttering up my screen through the whole game. Arriving at the origin of the call, we enter to be met by a gruesome spectacle. While Daniel's reaction is certainly volatile, and we can hear his internal computer setting off all kinds of alarms, the degree of restraint he shows here is quite impressive. Not only is he not vomiting his guts up at the sight of a decapitated body, but he's also compartmentalizing his fear and telling himself he has no reason to believe that the victim is his son. I'm starting to get a clearer picture of why he sounds so tired. It's entirely possible that this isn't the first decapitated body he's seen today. Upon discovering this, the entire apartment complex goes into lockdown as alarms warn of a possible nanophage outbreak, and in the process, Lazarski is cut off from communications with his precinct. This last part is all a bit too convenient if you ask me. It does make sense toward the end of the game, I guess, and it would definitely be a lot less fun if we had more detectives and an entire forensics team backing us up. But still. Given all the retro tech in this world, I'm surprised they didn't just show the phone lines getting cut Matrix style. So we are now trapped and alone in a strange apartment block with a murder investigation to contend with, our son to find, maybe, and quite possibly a dangerous killer to catch. I guess we better get started with some serious observing. When preparing for a video, I like to do some research on the studio that created the game I'm talking about, and take a look at what else they produced to try and get some context for why certain creative decisions were made. The problem with Bloober Team is that the conversations around them at the moment are, well, you've used the internet at least once, right? I likewise wasn't all that interested in playing most of their other games. They just aren't my brand of horror. I might give Medium a try at some point, but not yet. Fortunately, Scott over at Scott's Game Asylum did the legwork so that I don't have to, and I highly recommend his Bloober Team horror games video if you want to get a better idea of the kind of games these guys make. It seems overall though that Observer is just another iteration of Layers of Fear. That is to say, they clearly enjoyed making that game, had success with it, and went on to work on that formula, no doubt bringing in features and ideas that had been chopped from previous games. I'm actually on the fence as to whether or not Observer is a horror game though. I don't mean that as an insult, just that the vibe is very different for me. The game is certainly strange and unnerving at times, but a lot of what goes on runs the gauntlet from weird to just outright funny.
Okay, how about you shut the fuck up?
To start, Observer takes place in an alternative future. On one hand, we've got human augmentation and neural jacks, and on the other, we've got very clunky old-looking computers with really basic operating systems and graphical output. It's almost like the home PC or game console era got skipped in favor of the Matrix, and since that was so much better, no one felt the need to invest in regular PC development. It's odd, but god damn it, it works. All of this retro tech is actually a big part of what hooked me into the game in the first place. Even just going from the Steam page and the trailers, I thought, yeah, this is for me. A large part of Observer's gameplay loop is walking around this dilapidated building that exists at the very bottom of the social chain and just talking to people. Or rather, talking into a microphone while jittery, bizarre and broken images on a small TV screen talk back at you. You encounter almost no one in this entire game that's still alive. This actually creates the feeling that there's actually no one else in this building, and you're just talking to echoes or strange computer glitches. This vibe only gets strengthened as the walls of reality start to break down as the game goes on. You see, while Lazarski can jack into people's minds and go into these bizarre dream logic sequences, they're supposed to be confined to just these moments. So when we see it bleeding into reality in the late game, it leaves one questioning what, if any, part of this is actually supposed to have happened at all. The ending doesn't leave you hanging in that regard, but it's certainly very interesting. The only other human character we actually interact with in the building is the caretaker Jakowski, a man of limited conversation skills it seems.
Oh, tenant? Huh?
What? No. Family.
Family. No. Tenant?
Exploring his office, however, reveals he's quite the complex character. He's a veteran of the Third World War, and his clunky augmentation and skin grafts are the result of some terrible things that happened to him then.
Plasma sweep. Hit our convoy.
On top of that, he's being denied access to aid with his implants because his current job is not good enough for him to qualify for aid. Regular cyberpunk enjoyers won't need to know much more about Chiron than that they're a megacorp to see them as a soulless entity, representing the very worst in humanity and the dangers of unchecked hypercapitalism. But having it all thrown up here like this, and so shamelessly, is really on the nose. I mean, surely a man in a low-paying janitorial job is more in need of aid than one who has a Class B or higher or whatever the fuck kind of job that's supposed to be. And this man clearly has more damage than just what we can see going on, that he acquired in the service of his nation, which may disqualify him from said employment, so this is one hell of a rigged system. So well done, Bloober, for saying a lot by saying a little. There's actually a pretty cool moment of reactivity in this scene too. If you go and just talk to Jakowski after the lockdown initiates, he gives you access to his office. If, however, you just go snooping around in there uninvited,
Needs to get out.
the residents of the apartments are a pretty wild bunch, and are the primary way that things about the world are revealed. They speak volumes about a society that is terrified of the nanophage, so much so that anti-upgrade religions have established themselves.
Is having a neural connection to the web worth renouncing your humanity? Is a body held together with screws and wires really worth a corrupted soul?
Cool, bro. You don't got any chrome, much respect, but you're clearly looking down your nose at those who do, and as Daniel points out, in this world, not having any chrome isn't a luxury most people can afford. Then there's guys who live in their entertainment and either can't bear to be left in silence for a few minutes.
Hey, you wouldn't happen to know when they're gonna fix the connection. Not that it's like super important to me or anything, I just need to know. It's just that it feels weird to just sit here, alone, with my thoughts. You know?
Or have become completely disconnected from reality as a result.
I'm the captain of the Endeavor, a representative of the United Earth Initiative. I was up on the bridge when everything went black.
And of course, what dystopia would be complete without incels?
She'll have no choice but to come to me, begging. But it'll be too late, you hear me? Too late!
These conversations very quickly became the highlight of the game for me, and some of them are definitely a little disturbing.
No, he'll see you. He doesn't like me talking to other men.
Does he have a name?
Please, just go away. He'll get mad if he hears us.
But if you want to talk about weirdness, well, I'd like to spoil a couple of side quests if that's okay. By all means, skip ahead to the gameplay section if you don't want anything ruined for you. Certainly, these are some of the more interesting moments, so if you want to discover them for yourself, I won't hold it against you. Especially if you leave me the price of a coffee here and help feed my crippling caffeine addiction. Probably the most interesting side quest, and the one that has very ominous repercussions for the future of this world, comes when you receive a call for help on your personal wrist computer and head over to apartment 108 to investigate. Now, in the interest of not getting my channel removed from YouTube, I can't really show you much of what's in this place, but suffice to say, it does not bode well for anyone who winds up trapped in here with the owner. Well, I guess that depends on what you're into. Breaking into the computer and examining the various, accessories that we find in here, we get the impression that we could be dealing with some kind of sex trafficking ring, and that this particular room is where, let's just say, training takes place. We are directed down to a basement storage room where something or someone is apparently being kept, and when we finally get the chance to get in there, we discover... What the hell? I mean, okay, it's a little weird, but I'm not one to kink shame. But then, if that's all that's down here, who put out the call for help? Simple. They did. Man, that's dark. It's a similar situation with replicants in Blade Runner or the boomers in AD Police. On one hand, creating machines to do the work of people is something we've been doing since before the Industrial Revolution. But if you start to give those machines human characteristics, and presumably you want your new, best friend to appear as human as possible, at what point should they be given the same human rights, and maybe get some kind of say in the function they serve, or the life they lead? Need another moral dilemma? How about this guy who seems to be trading in human organs that he harvests from... somewhere. Break open another storage unit and we find...
Fuck. A living organ farm.
Oh, God. Well, whatever this is, it's very much alive. And while there are customers looking for genital upgrades, there are people whose lives are actually being saved and improved by the service being provided here. We find this creature in great distress. It is usually kept in a pleasant illusion of a happy life thanks to drugs and a VR headset. It is generally unaware of the truth of its existence, and you might find yourself thinking this is the most humane way something like this could be taken care of. Well, it's still exploitation of another living organism, and hey, Neither myself nor the game are going to judge you for your choice here, but it's a hell of a conundrum to put to the players. On one hand, this creature really saves human lives. On the other, well, what if it looked less like a pig and more like a person? Would that change anything? Even if this creature isn't suffering, can we truly square this with our morality and let this continue? Do the ends justify the means, or are we no different than Umbrella for delving into disgusting medical practices to line our pockets? This one alone stumped me for a longer time than any actual puzzle in the game, and I still couldn't tell you if I made the right choice or not. Moments like this are actually some of the best ways that games can engage us and teach us, challenge us, and help us consider other points of view. I really have to hand it to Bloober Team here, if nowhere else. Observer isn't exactly a walking sim, but it's also not exactly a narrative puzzle game. It's something that hangs about halfway between the two, and I have to say, there is something kind of charming about this. It's a walking sim in the sense that we move around at a relatively slow pace while the story and the world are slowly drip-fed to us, unraveling through various environmental methods, and is mostly a linear process. It's a puzzle game in that there are very light puzzle-solving mechanics, very basic dialogue trees, and some simple find keys to open door problems to take care of. It isn't fully committed to either branch of this, and there is a third, much less interesting component to the gameplay that we'll talk about later. However, I'd say overall that this transitional space between two genres is a good place for Observer to reveal itself to us. Since the majority of the game takes place in this very rundown, low-income style building, most of our time is just spent walking around, ringing doorbells, having light conversations with anyone who's home, and then moving on to the next part. One complaint I have here is about the interface. Rather than just clicking on doors to open them, you are required to click and drag your mouse in a direction. This adds nothing to the game but a layer of frustration. It's very mild, but it is annoying. I assume this was some attempt at creating greater immersion, but it completely fails and doesn't need to be there at all. It's a minor gripe, but it's one I felt was worth mentioning. So, it doesn't sound like much, does it? At the start of the game, just ringing all these doorbells felt a bit tedious. On one hand, I had a compulsion to ring every doorbell for fear of missing one that held some secret side quest or interesting tidbit of case-related information. On the other, I almost found myself groaning inside when, after ringing a bell, the camera slowly started orienting itself towards the door for a no doubt lengthy conversation with whatever weirdo lay just beyond. That was until I really started to listen to these people, and started to get a sense of their lives and the world they inhabit. I recall having a similar experience the first time I played Disco Elysium. Games have conditioned me to the idea that conversations are only part of the game. RPGs especially usually have involved combat systems with stats and tactics to think about. So, after a while of just listening to quirky dialogue, I was sort of wondering when it would stop, so I could get to whatever else the game had to offer. It was only when it dawned on me that this was the game that I was able to reorient myself to what was going on and really start enjoying it. The same applies here. While Observer does have other things to offer, this is the major exploration and world building mechanic, and it's actually really fun. As I explored, I stumbled across the few side objectives that the game had to offer, and both these and the game's main story led me into the few doors that could actually be opened and the even stranger things that lay beyond them. The puzzle-solving component generally takes place inside various rooms that have become crime scenes. These are usually murders, but they can just be investigations into suspicious events too. The first murder scene is where we get introduced to all these systems, but simply, Daniel has some fairly heavy augmentation installed to help him do his job. This includes different scanning modes built into his eyes, and a night vision mode for navigating in dark places. Crime scenes are these little information gathering puzzles where you look around, check objects that can be interacted with, hold the right mouse button to zoom in on things, and cycle through your various vision modes to see if they give any information about what you're looking at. A lot of what you scan is basically useless, and that's okay. After all, why would everything in someone's house be connected to their murder? You'll eventually track down the few things needed to progress your investigation though, and move on to the next area. Occasionally, you'll have to find a code or figure out a password by examining things in the environment, which I think is pretty cool, and there's even a hacking minigame to help you find some or all of the numbers you need to break through a door. Just like in Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, there seems to be some kind of problem with augmentation rejection. In this game, it's referred to as synchronization, and is tracked on this part of the UI here. Daniel will gradually desync as he goes about doing his business, and actually using the various vision modes seems to speed the whole process up. To fix the issue, he needs to take a hit of Synchrosine, this game's version of Neuropazine, but if I have to be honest, I don't know what this actually does. On one hand, this drug seems to be a finite resource, albeit one you can find in every apartment you enter because almost everyone has some kind of augmentation installed. I certainly never run out during the entire game, but if this drug is tied to some kind of fail state, then that means the whole game actually has a time limit on it, albeit a fairly massive one. And if that isn't the case, then what's the point of this? Overall though, the exploration and the little investigations are pretty cool. It's not very challenging, but it doesn't break the pacing or immersion either. At no point did my game come to a grinding halt so I could figure out some obscure moon logic puzzle that would end with me just tabbing into a web browser and googling the answer. All these systems work to give you information about the story and the world we've found ourselves in, and if nothing else, every time you find a new computer to access, you can unlock more levels of this cool little game here. I mean, it's not fun. Which brings us to the final and unfortunately, worst part of the game. The brain dives. The Observer's superpower, as it were, and what should be the real hook of the game. So you'd think it'd be awesome, right? Well, buckle up guys, because I really don't have a lot that's nice to say about these. So, it's around the third apartment we enter where we find a gruesome scene with a barely living victim coughing out his last breaths in among all this blood. Lazarski states that he can't help him, but that he might be able to catch the guy who did this. I don't know. I doubt this guy cares all that much about that anymore. Regardless, Lazarski unspools his brain jack and dives in to see what lies beneath. The word horror isn't all that easily definable. I've said before that we can't really just say that horror is scary, as what scares people is very subjective, and I could definitely see some people getting unnerved by some of the imagery that happens in these parts of the games, and there is at least one horror game mechanic that we're going to talk about later, but still, I don't really see a lot of horror here. Bloober Team's idea of horror, if that is what they're going for, seems to be just excessively disorienting the player and trying to overload them with rapid-fire stimulus. The dream spaces we enter once we are connected to another person's mind serve as an excuse to just throw the rulebook out the window, and they don't seem to have considered the player experience in any way. It's basically allowing them to stop doing all the interesting new stuff that's unique to this game and just fall back on the same ideas they used in the first layers of fear. It's not all bad, as there is some very cool visual storytelling going on here. These sections actually take us out of the building we've been exploring to see glimpses of the wider world beyond. I especially like the way working at Chiron is represented in one dream sequence. How soulless and empty it all seems, with entire human lives full of hopes, dreams, and all manner of complex emotional connections and relationships, all reduced into being worker drones for a monolithic superpower that doesn't care for them. I think we've all had at least one dream like that, woke up and immediately started working on our resumes. Even so, every time I sat down to play this, knowing I was going to be exploring the apartments and talking with all the strange people within, I was very eager to get this game fired up and things moving. But if I closed out just before starting one of these sections, I would always procrastinate before coming back to it. A world without rules is not one that's interesting to navigate, and places you completely at the mercy of the developers to get through it. It's impossible to make choices about whether or not to go left or right, forwards or backwards, when choosing any of them can just flip you over to a completely different place, and probably all of them take you to the same place. So how can we, as players, feel like we are the ones who are progressing the story, when simply taking 3 steps completely changes the scene without warning? Faced with this level of control, how can we do anything but hold down the forward key and hope this is what the game wants us to do? In which case, we may as well just be watching a cutscene. Occasionally, the game does use audio cues to clue us into what we need to do. In an early brain dive, we wind up in a corridor that feels like an infinite loop that we can't escape from. That is until we hear this loud clicking sound, and then realize it's coming from this TV here. Looking at the picture, we can discover the order in which we're supposed to travel down each corridor to escape the loop. That's pretty cool. But they also have stuff like this. I mean, what is this? It's just noise and clutter on my screen. Who exactly is this supposed to unnerve? Parents? This doesn't feel like a well-crafted game moment at all. It feels more like just throwing shit at a wall and hoping something sticks. So, since we're here, I guess we have to talk about the part everyone hates. A little context here though. So, imagine this. I'm on my second or third brain dive. I'm holding the forward key and trying to get through this mess as quickly as I can, when this happens. Wait, what? Game over? This game has a fail state? Since when? I've been playing this game for over an hour, and the concept of a fail state hasn't even come up once. At no point prior to this had the game even implied the existence of a gameplay antagonist, stealth or combat mechanics, and a penalty for failing to use them. This is easily the worst implementation of stealth in a game. It comes out of nowhere, you aren't trained in any way to deal with it prior to it happening. Stealth just means crouching with no consideration for things like light and dark, and being caught is an instant game over. It's as bad as having a single succeed or die QTE show up in your game out of nowhere during a cutscene. How is this in a game that came out in 2017? Okay, let's tackle these one point at a time. First, dream logic. It's fine to have worlds and spaces that don't obey the laws of physics in our world, but they should have some kind of rules, and those rules should be things we as players can intuit and establish a link between cause and effect. Think about all of the altered world events in Control. There is some truly batshit crazy stuff in the oldest house, and while the game leaves you with plenty of unanswered questions at the end, you are able to understand and control all that weirdness. This mess of random images could easily have been replaced with a more interesting cyberspace construct that had its own rules that would have made for better navigation and puzzle mechanics. As for the stealth, to my mind, the only really good stalker system from any game series is in Resident Evil 7. This is no doubt because it's built on top of systems and experiments that Capcom have been doing with their games since Resident Evil 3. But it works because it's just an extension of the existing gameplay loop. The survival part of survival horror is all about the handling and use of extremely limited resources to combat overwhelming odds. When you see a zombie, you have to weigh the pros and cons of losing anything from 5 to 10 bullets trying to kill it, and being unprepared for that much bigger monster coming down the line, or trying to slip by it, risking getting grabbed and losing a health regeneration item to stay in the game. Jack Baker does exactly the same thing. It's just he's way stronger, hits way harder, and doesn't stay dead until the end of the second DLC, when his brother finally puts him down for good. In RE7, we can hide from Jack, but being seen isn't a game over. It puts us into the same fight or flight situation as any of the regular enemies in the game, just dialed up to 11. On top of that, the way Jack taunts and bullies you, it stirs up all kinds of high school trauma and makes him a truly terrifying creature to contend with. Still, we do get our moment against him. Horror exists within our minds. We know that we are safe when we watch a movie or play a game, but we enter into an agreement with the creators where we will meet them halfway. If they provide a good enough show, we'll trick ourselves into thinking we're actually in danger. The problem is that suspension of disbelief can easily be broken by something like, I don't know, a game over screen. It's the unknown that keeps us on the edge, the mystery of what might happen if the big bad wolf catches us. That mystery gets destroyed the moment we fade to black and I'm simply thrown back to an earlier checkpoint. And after 2 or 3 tries at this, it stops being scary and becomes outright annoying. Yes, I am saying that Outlast is objectively bad. So, to sum up, this sucks. The brain dive elements do become a little more interesting when they start to bleed into regular reality, and it leaves one thinking if Daniel here is the one having the breakdown or if something more sinister is afoot. Even so, this whole part of the game is a net negative, and it is something that will make me seriously reconsider every time I think about replaying this in the future.
Attention tenants. This is a sanctioned lockdown procedure. There is no need for concern. Remain in your apartments and await instructions.
I think what I like most about Observer's story is the way in which the murder investigation is just a framing for the far more important family drama of Daniel Lazarski, his now dead wife, and his son Adam. And while I do not like this thing as a game mechanic, I had quite an aha moment when I realized what it represented. Daniel is a man with some baggage. Certainly it's not on a par with what James Sunderland did to himself, but it's along the same lines. During most of the brain dives, we have moments where the memories we are observing get tangled up with the trauma that exists within our protagonist's brain. Sometime prior to the start of the game, Daniel's wife Laura was diagnosed presumably with cancer, and while she could have had cybernetic implants installed to help her overcome it, she refused them, claiming that she didn't feel she would be herself anymore if she just replaced parts of herself like that. In the aftermath of this, Adam blamed his father for not encouraging her to go through with having implants, and her death is what strained their relationship and led to them going their separate ways. Laura's death is actually both of these characters' critical motivations. On her deathbed, Daniel promised her he'd protect Adam no matter what, while Adam was affected much worse and begins down the path that will lead us to this very fateful night. But let's unravel this in the same way that it's presented to us. First, our killer. While hunting for our killer and also at times trying to evade him is our primary goal, they are not all that integral to this larger drama. They are a convenient tool, used to serve a purpose, only they are one that goes off the rails after that. This splicer is someone suffering from a serious identity crisis, and maybe other mental health issues. They've developed a fixation on werewolf mythology, and have invested a lot of time and money into transforming their body into something considerably less than human. It's when we explore its lair in the sewers though that we discover the prize they took from the first murder scene, and Daniel has to face the reality that his son is in fact dead. That is right up until his grieving is interrupted by his son contacting him. We actually have a choice now as to whether or not we will try to invade Adam's mind here, and choosing to do so is quite the experience. So we are directed to this place called Sanctuary, and given that this is the first place we visited so far that isn't part of some shithole rundown apartment, it serves as a great opportunity for Bloober's level artists to just really show off their skills. And oh god, this music. It gives an incredible vibe. Everything I've largely praised about the art direction in this game is here just turned up to 11. Maybe 12 given that this was a small indie team putting this together. Sanctuary, as it happens, is a kind of VR salon, and once we jack in, we are able to connect with the digital ghost of Adam. You see, Adam couldn't get over his own grief, and he opted for a much less healthy option of obsessing over it and trying to create a world where no one would have to suffer that again. But rather than doing something useful like becoming a doctor or a medical researcher or Batman, he wanted to build a system that could save the memory of a person, basically creating a perfect digital soul that can survive the death of the body and, I presume, get downloaded into one of these convenient sex robots at a later date. Daniel is very much on form here when he says,
"Just to keep existing. Sounds like a living nightmare."
I mean, imagine being locked in a room with yourself for all eternity. Now tell me you wouldn't choose total oblivion over that. Adam was eventually cut loose from Chiron, and the plug was pulled on his research. The murder victims we encounter are actually his little conspiracy of people. Helena got a low-level job at Chiron and could access the computers there. The doctor performed illegal augmentation on her so she could hack into the computers there and retrieve Adam's data. And then he tried to finish what he'd started from his rundown little room. It would seem their scheme has finally caught up with them. Now only Adam's digital ghost is left, but a virus sent by Chiron is closing in to end him. Daniel agrees to help lift the lockdown so that Adam can escape from the local network, which leads us into our final area where, once again, the walls between reality and fantasy break down, and we are stalked by this thing. Success, however, reveals a final twist that is... well, I'll let you make up your own mind. But before we talk about that, take a look at this. While operating systems like Windows have a visual user interface that gives the impression of things being moved around in a digital space, that's not even close to what's going on in the world of Tron. You can't just suck your brain or whatever you might consider to be your soul onto a network. Of course, this is all wild science fiction and borders on future fantasy, but what we're looking at is more like a backup copy. Now, the degree to which you consider a perfect copy to be different from the original is a philosophical and theological question that I'm not interested in answering today. I mean, we are going to be talking about that in a future video, but suffice to say, this particular Adam isn't exactly who he claims to be when we first meet him. What we discover at the end is that the killer was actually set up on Adam not by Chiron, but by his AI copy. Adam, it seems, had not only managed to make a copy of his memory engram, or whatever you want to call it, but this one felt it was actually an upgrade on the original, and considered itself to be very much alive. Adam has actually made many prototype backups of himself and deleted them all at some point, something this one considers murder. And remember, if this is a copy of Adam's memories, that also includes the memories and the intent to delete the backup copy. What an interesting prestige moment we have here. So, the backup moved to kill Adam, and Adam released the virus to try and destroy it. This leaves us with a very interesting philosophical decision. I won't spoil the endings exactly. They're fine, I guess, but Adam's copy wants to merge with his father through his neural augmentation. This is the only way it can effectively escape the network and the virus. The breaks in reality we've been experiencing have all been part of the Adam AI trying to establish a connection with Daniel, trying to communicate with him. This is part of the reason why Daniel's personal trauma is getting mixed up with the images of the minds he's invading. And at the end we get the missing piece of the drama that ended the relationship between Daniel and Adam. You see, Daniel didn't choose to get augmented. He was critically wounded in the line of duty, and opted to get upgraded so that he could live and keep his promise to his wife. Adam, not aware of this though, saw his father as a hypocrite for getting upgraded where his mother didn't, and saw only a monstrous mass of flesh and machine when he looked at him. Yeah. That's a pretty cool twist of the knife. Adam's construct puts forward the case that he is all that's left of his son. A perfect copy, in fact. One that is capable of forgiving him where the original wasn't. And again, that question. If the copy is perfect, how is it different from the original in any way? What defines a person's identity? Daniel doesn't seem like the religious type, so the concept of a soul probably doesn't even factor into that. So, here is a collection of Adam's memories. All of them. Every experience that has made up his personality. And he's asking his father for help. It's quite the puzzle. I actually checked both endings prior to writing my script. They're satisfying enough, and leave you with enough to consider, and to maybe want to talk about with your friends or on Reddit. So, yeah, it's quite the wild ride, all things considered. It's definitely not the best, but it's definitely one of a kind. I am not sure if I'm ever going to play Observer again. If I do, then it'll be a considerable time in the future. For all I enjoyed about exploring the world, the parts I don't like are too invasive into the experience. Still, considering how cheap it is to pick up on sale, and also that it doesn't overstay its welcome at all, well, you can definitely do a lot worse with your time and money. As for Bloober and Silent Hill, I honestly have no idea. They clearly have some great art direction, and some sense of how to tell a story through the worlds they create. but Observer is a wholly different game from Silent Hill. In the end, the final product must be judged on its own merits, both as a game and as a remake. I certainly don't want this remake to suck, so I wish them the best, both for them and for the entire Silent Hill fandom. I must admit that walking around a low-income apartment block in sci-fi dystopian Poland didn't give me the best impression of the country. So, how about we give it another shot? Let's switch things up though. How about we head away from a hypothetical future into a very real past, albeit with a few concessions to fantasy. Not so long ago, a game I've had my eye on since its announcement finally came out, and it has all the things I want from a game. It's an isometric RPG with charming art direction. It's been made on a AA budget, but that clearly didn't stop the devs from really punching above their weight class. And it's a story-rich RPG with interesting characters and quirky combat mechanics. It all sounds too good to be true. So let's find out if the studio landed it. Next time, we are traveling back to pre-World War I Poland and battling political upheaval and demonic forces as Viktor Szulski, the Thaumaturge.